Kevin Durso has reaction from the players on our website, 973ESPN.com. A surprising move or not, let's bring Kevin in, who wrote at 973ESPN.com that it's time for the Flyers to make some sort of move. Kevin, was this the move you were asking for?
I'm not sure if it's the one I was asking for, but I did include in that article that they could do something that was a little bit off the radar. I don't think this was completely off the radar, but it's pretty far off compared to what everybody else probably had in mind. I think everybody figured a coaching change was probably in the works of some sort, and this was a little bit more than we bargained for.
Coaching change, many people feel, okay, Hextall is gone. Hextall was his guy. It's only a matter of time. Do you think Dave Hextall is next to go, or will they allow him to kind of try to navigate this himself?
I think the only reason that we haven't heard much about a coaching change is because there's a game tomorrow, and to not break up the routine here going into a game day, that they would just let them have the practice today, let Hextall coach the game out, and go from there. I do think they want to get a new GM in before they do anything with the coaching staff, but I find it hard to believe that they'll get a new GM and not make a change to the coaching staff, just because that's typically the way these things work. If a GM comes in, he wants to bring his own coaching staff in, a guy who he is familiar with, a guy who he's hand-selected to be the guy behind the bench. I think that's only a matter of time before we see another change.
Kevin, why Ron Hextall? Why now? Was he the right guy? Was he the fall guy for what's going on with this team, which you wrote about, earlier in the week? Very mediocre right now.
Yeah, no question. I do think that there's, in part, I do think this is partially a move that says he's the fall guy, especially if this is the only change. That makes this probably the wrong decision, because if this is the only thing that they're changing, it's kind of like starting from scratch almost. It's more of a head scratcher. If this is a change that indicates that more changes are coming, I think personally, my best guess would be that Ron Hextall was not willing to budge on anything else. They probably, ownership or upper management probably approached him about, we've got to do something here, whether it's a coaching change or a significant roster move of some sort. And Hextall wasn't willing to make that move ultimately, and they basically, it was, if you're not going to make the change, then you're going to be the change that we end up making. So I think that's where this came from.
When you look at Ron Hextall, has he done a poor job? I mean, or is this just a move to make a move? I mean, realistically, a lot of people seemingly thought he got him out of salary cap hell. They should be able to be players next year. A lot of young players. Yeah, we haven't seen a lot of growth and development from some of those young guys that I think we would have liked to. But do you point the finger and say Ron Hextall has not done a good job?
I think Ron Hextall did a good job in terms of building out the farm system, acquiring draft picks, getting the Flyers out of the salary cap problem they were in, no question about it. I think one of the biggest problems with his time as the GM was that he probably didn't put enough focus on the current roster, the team playing at the NHL level. Sure, there's a lot of pieces into this situation, is going to have a pretty decent situation, all things considered. There's a lot of prospects in the pool. There's salary cap room. There's room to do some things with this roster for anybody who steps in to be the GM. But I think Hextall kind of at times would ignore the current situation. I think the two biggest areas for that are the goaltending and the penalty kill. During the offseason, he didn't have to go into this season with the same goalie tandem that's been used for the last season and a half, if you will. Brian Elliott was last year. Michael Neuvirt's been 2 or 3 years of this now. And if you couldn't see the injury problems coming there, then you were kind of naive to the situation. He could have done a better job preparing for that. He also could have upgraded the penalty kill from outside instead of trying to leave spots unblocked for prospects and then ultimately not really giving them much of a chance. And that could be a coaching thing combined with a GM. Who knows? Maybe that's why Hextall stood by Dave Hextall the way he has, and maybe that's why this came to a head today.
Who makes this decision?
It's tough to say. I mean, you'd think the first person you'd think of is Paul Holmgren, but I do believe that the ownership group that's still in control, the people from Comcast, that would be Dave Scott at the top, the idea is that they had a lot to do with this, and there's more to this than just meets the eye here. This isn't just Paul Holmgren as team president making a decision here. This is going even beyond that, and we haven't, you see these people kind of lurking around. There's not a whole lot of presence. This isn't when you talk about like the Phillies, for example, John Middleton's everywhere, it feels like, and he's got a say in kind of talking about the direction. We want to be spenders. We want to be buyers here and make significant upgrades. You don't see the Flyers ownership group, the acting ownership group from Comcast, doing that near as much. And I do think that there's somewhere underneath of the surface here that they had a big say in this as well, and that's why it kind of came down to, this wasn't just Paul Holmgren making a decision to make it. This was this ownership group having some involvement too.
Kevin Durso at Kevin_Durso covers the Flyers for 97.3 ESPN.com. 61% agree with the decision. 39% do not. 71% on Twitter at 973 ESPN say both should be fired, Hextall and Hextall. Only 4% say yes, it should have been Hextall. 21% Hextall. 71% say both. 4% neither. Ultimately, Paul Holmgren and Ron Hextall have been together in this organization for a long, long time. I mean, was there a disconnect between those two guys?
I don't think at the beginning, but I think eventually there was. I think it came into the statement released on behalf of Paul Holmgren as a team statement even indicated that there was a clear difference in philosophy for how this team was going to move forward to become a contender. And basically that, to me, sums it up as they needed to do something that was more significant in terms of a change when things aren't going the right way. And Hextall was still, I guess, not willing to budge. That's the thing I keep coming back to, is that I think he was unwilling to do anything of significance. He wanted to let his process play out. And after a while, I think that just became it was too tired. The idea, patience isn't a word that we associate with the Flyers very often, and it was something that took a lot of adjustment when Ron Hextall came in. Now I think the patience has kind of run out, and this is going to be the primary reason that Ron Hextall's out today, is that patience kind of ran out, and it was time to make a change.
Well, Kevin, I mean, you're around the team almost every day, at least in the home building, and I mean, for them to go into this season with this goaltending situation, I don't know how that's. If you're telling me did they want Carter Hart to make the team, and Hextall basically said no?
I have no idea about that. One thing I will say about that situation is that it was a weird situation during the preseason when Carter Hart was essentially outperforming every other goaltender in camp, and yet the talk was, there's a process behind this. It takes goalies a long time to develop. Now, truth be told, Carter Hart hasn't been near as consistent at the AHL level as maybe people would have thought, so the adjustment process is taking some time. He's not ready to come up to this level probably as of yet, and we're seeing that. But it's hard to tell people that in training camp when he's outperforming Brian Elliott. Michael Neuvirth's not even getting into games because of an injury, and you've got two other goalies who are dealing with injuries as well. So it was kind of hard to sell. It's hard to sell that when the numbers tell you otherwise.
Reaction from the players. Shock, disappointment.
Very much. Shock was probably the primary reaction here, but there was disappointment as well. I think Claude Giroux really spoke extensively today, and which is not something you normally see from him at least during a practice. He might take a few minutes after a game, but not all the time. And he talked a lot about how winning is everything here, and if they would have played better, then this wouldn't have happened. Jake Voracek, I thought, had another great quote, which was also, at this point, don't ask the players what's going to happen here. They just have to go out and play. But if things don't change, winning dictates what happens within an organization. If things don't go the right way, everybody is suspect to change. So this could just be the beginning.
How long does Hextall make it?
He'll make it through tomorrow's game for sure. I question everything from there just because this was pretty much – the time is ripe to make changes right now because they have such a limited schedule. They play Tuesday. They get 3 days off. They don't play again until Saturday in Pittsburgh. Then they get 4 days off and don't play again until a home game against Columbus the following Thursday. With only 3 games in a matter of 10 days, this is the time to be making these changes. I'm kind of curious to see how long it takes for the Flyers to – find a successor to Ron Hextall at this point. Speculation would be that Dean Lombardi's already in the organization in an advisory role, and he was the GM of those LA Kings teams that won 2 Stanley Cups. So that might be a direction that they look to go. There are external options potentially out there as well, but that all remains to be seen. It's very early in the process, and you'd have to ask permission for any interviews or things like that. I'd have to see. I'd wonder if the result dictates that tomorrow by any chance. You wonder if the result comes into play, and if they lose this game too, maybe they just pull the trigger now, maybe not. I was starting to lean towards maybe not. If they didn't do it before this home game against Ottawa, then I was leaning towards the week after. They'll play the road game against Pittsburgh, and then after that first week of December seems to be ripe for coaching changes with this organization. This was the same time that they fired John Stevens years ago and hired Peter Laviolette in the years they went to the Stanley Cup Final in 2010. So that first week of December just seems ripe for changes. If you've made it to a certain point in the season between the quarter mark and a third of the season, it's ripe for changes. I think that's somewhere in that timeline is when, if it's going to happen to Dave Hextall, I think that's when it'll happen.
You mentioned Dean Lombardi. He's already here. Mm-hmm. As far as any coaches out there that would intrigue you, do you have any in mind?
I think Joel Quenneville's right at the top of the list. Chicago fired him earlier in the year, and that kind of sent speculation really swirling around this organization because of the fact that people kind of felt that Dave Hextall was always on the hot seat coming into this year. They just didn't know how much, and
right.
I guess maybe
he's never been popular, Kevin.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess maybe he wasn't on the hot seat as much as we thought if Ron Hextall wasn't going to budge on anything in this process. So maybe that sent Hextall's seat into a blaze as well. But Quenneville's, as soon as his name came out as an available head coach, this is a guy with a resume to back everything up. He's won 3 Stanley Cups with Chicago. The first one came against the Flyers in 2010. He's coached through long tenures, both with St. Louis and with Chicago in his career. He's got a Hall of Fame resume. That's the first one that comes to mind. Edmonton recently fired Todd McClellan as well, so that's another name. He didn't have as much success with Edmonton, but he had long-running success with San Jose, and they made playoff runs. So he's another guy that comes to mind. The other name that comes to mind isn't necessarily external, but you wonder if they turn to Scott Gordon, the coach of the Lehigh Valley Phantoms in the AHL, and ask him to kind of be a fixer-upper here in this case, because he's had success in the minors. He got the Phantoms to the Eastern Conference Final in the previous season, and they've been off to a decent start this year, and he's done a good job of molding that young talent that's come in and been at the AHL level. Good job with special teams as well. Their penalty kill is ranked right at the top of the AHL, so that would be refreshing for the Flyers, no question about it. So maybe he's the guy too. You never know. I would think that they'd want to do this. Dean Lombardi would not necessarily, as the GM, be completely outside the organization, but it would be a little bit out of the box as compared to some of the other names that could get thrown around. I would not be surprised at all, though, if they decide to go a little bit outside of the organization on the head coach if they were to change coaches.
Yeah.
And I think Quenneville's right at the top of the list.
Yeah, they win 4-0 on Black Friday, then they get bombed 6-0 on Saturday night. They're 10-11-2. It's just been a microcosm of the season. They win a game, they look good. They lose a game, they look horrible. No consistency. And the coach, the GM is fired. I think the more surprising thing is that the GM went before the coach, but he did hire the coach, and I would imagine that you're right, Kevin. They must have said, look, it's either Hextall or you. I'm not firing Hextall. All right, well, then you're out.
Yeah, probably. And, I think that the winds of change can blow for many different reasons. The win on Friday is all well and good, but when you look at the 2 games that surrounded it, you go out and that was about as unprepared as I've seen a team on Wednesday against Buffalo. That was just pathetic. And then in Toronto, it looked even worse. And at this point, what else are you supposed to do other than make a change that speaks volumes to the rest of this organization? And I think this one certainly did, but I don't think it's the only thing to come here. I think there's much more that lies beneath the surface.
Well, if news happens, at Kevin_Durso, make sure you follow him on Twitter. And, of course, check out 97.3 ESPN.com. He's got a ton of reaction on our website right now, and it has been getting a lot of hits today as shocking news. Ron Hextall fired by the Flyers. Kevin, great job, man. Thanks.